All right, class. So this is where we left off in all classes. I provided you the definition for psychoactive drug, tolerance, withdrawal. I also made a note that you needed to be familiar with substance use disorder. Definition for that: continued substance craving and use despite significant life disruption and or physical risk. I also provided you the definition for addiction, and we discussed withdrawal, but addiction is also listed on another slide as well. So if you didn't write it down here, I'll mention it again in the slides. All right, continuing on. Let's see here. There we go. Substance use disorder. I discussed it in class. Really doesn't give you gives you a hint of the definition, but I believe the definition I provided to you all and what's also listed briefly in the textbook is a little bit more in depth than what's listed here. Tolerance, we talked about this here. It's just giving you the definition as it didn't list it in the slide 2 slides ago. In order to experience the same effects of that drug that you received initially, your body builds a tolerance, or what I'll say is your body has become accustomed to that drug, and so your body reacts to that drug. But over time, as you continue to use that drug, the effect will weaken from the dosage that you initially started. So, for instance, and this can occur with any type of drug, as I discussed in class. Let's say you suffered from really bad headaches and you took ibuprofen or a Tylenol or acetaminophen every day, and you took one, and one cured your headache. Well, maybe after about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even a month or 2 or 3 months, your body is going to basically kind of eat that up and say, okay, that's great that you took the one Tylenol, that's great you took the one ibuprofen, but that's not working anymore. So your headache is not going to go away. So what do? You increase the dosage. Instead of doing one, you take 2. And now you are getting the desired effect with the 2 pills that you were getting with the one initially, because your body has developed a tolerance for it. And also in class, this is how or why I mentioned that people will suffer from accidental drug overdoses, and a lot of times students have a hard time understanding how would it be accidental, especially when it's using street drugs. It's accidental because their whole intent, their whole purpose was not to kill themselves when they were getting high. They were trying to achieve that high that they had before, but because of their continued use and abuse of that particular drug, it required more, to the point where the body could no longer handle that increased dosage. So that's how accidental overdoses take place. We discussed addiction. It's listed here as well. I also listed or made a note of addiction, not only with drugs, but with also with behaviors. So some behaviors that I included were gambling, but some other behaviors that are a little bit more in depth here are eating addictions, where a person that would definitely lead to like obesity. And great examples of this is the show, like My 600 Pound Life, where those individuals have severe eating addictions, and their addictions a lot of times is triggered by previous trauma. And so the food and eating is their happy place, so and that's how addictions work with any type of addiction in a lot of cases. Not in all cases, but definitely in a lot. Work addiction, sex addiction, where a person is considered a sexaholic, those are also addictions, but they're just behaviors versus drugs. All right, so we have 3 major categories of psychoactive drugs. We have depressants, those are your downers; stimulants, those are your uppers; and hallucinogens, which are kind of your psychedelic hallucinations, things of that nature. So let's dive into them. All right, so first up, we have depressants. They calm down neural activity, so they calm down the brain's activity. That's all the neural activity it is. It's calming down the brain activity and slowing down your body functions. So when a person has taken a depressant, they'll be lethargic, move pretty slow, talk slow, or altogether, some of them may just fall asleep. Okay. One depressant that they're bringing up, or that falls into that category, is alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant, and here's giving you some more information about alcohol use disorder, which I do want you to be familiar with. Alcohol use disorder is marked by a tolerance where they're having to continue that alcohol usage in order to achieve that same, I know it's a low, but it's still a kind of high feeling. It's also known as alcoholism. Withdrawal and a drive to continue even though there are problematic uses, such as DUIs, loss of work, or getting written up at work, showing up to work drunk, things of that nature. Those are just some of the examples of problematic use. Also, losing your family and your license and your livelihood and going to jail, your freedom, losing your freedom. So those are some, that's one major example of a depressant. Continuing on with depressants, barbiturates, they also fall into that category. They're tranquilizers. You have opiates. We've heard that we have opioid. It's catastrophic, epidemic with opioids. So you have heroin addicts, methadone, oxycontin, fentanyl. Those all fall into that category. Morphine, that's in that same category as well. Codeine. Ambien is also considered a depressant as well, because it's a downer, okay? And if you look back at the previous slide, it was telling you how your memory can be affected. Your memory can definitely be affected, and you lose bits and pieces of time with Ambien. I know that from firsthand experience because I suffer from insomnia, and so Ambien was one of the earlier drugs that I had to take, but when I realized that it was affecting my memory, I asked my doctor to give me something else. So I no longer take Ambien, but one of the side effects is memory loss. All right, here, stimulants. Stimulants are our uppers. So this excites neural activity, so it increases neural activity, brain activity. It speeds up the function. We get a rise in energy, and for some drugs, self-confidence, depending on the drug. Some examples of stimulants are going to be caffeine, cigarettes, nicotine, amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, methamphetamines. These all are exciting the brain activity, so high functioning, high moving, and those are just some of the examples with that. As you can see, they're using nicotine as the example. So it is quickly addictive, definitely an increased risk of dying from the habit due to cancer, lung disorders, all types of things. Cigarettes also, nicotine in cigarettes, if you didn't know, definitely affects your heart and can cause increased risk of high blood pressure, increased risk of heart disease, heart attacks. So just not the things that we typically think of with nicotine and cigarettes and smoking. Also affects your heart for sure. All right, withdrawal related to acute cravings and a relapse. And here are some of the physiological effects of nicotine. Arousal of the brain. All right, increases heart rate and blood pressure, as I stated. At high levels, relaxes muscles and triggers the release of neurotransmitters that may reduce stress. So this is why you have some people that will smoke when they are stressed out. reduce circulation to extremities, and then suppresses the appetite for carbohydrates. Some other ones that I brought up: cocaine, methamphetamines, ecstasy. So I just want you to be familiar with what is considered first of all, I want you to know what stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens are, how they're defined. And then I would want you to be able to identify what type of drugs fit into those categories, because I'm going to give you scenario questions. So I want you to be able to identify them when you see them on a test. All right, and this is just kind of showing you when we go back and talk about, if you can go back and remember how we said the neurotransmitters work and how they send a message to the brain, and then the brain ultimately sends a message to the spinal cord, if that is where the message needs to be sent. And it's just showing you here with the reuptake and how a person will have experienced that extreme euphoria, kind of very happiness, very much so in happy land. And then they'll crash when the drug effects have worn off. And so that takes them back to, I need to seek that happy feeling, therefore I need to seek that drug. All right, hallucinogens. They distort perceptions and evoke sensory images and sensory input absence. So dreamlike scenes, hallucinations, near-death experiences. Some examples are ecstasy and LSD, as you can see here. Also, I want you to add two hallucinogens to that definition. They're psychedelics, mind-manifesting drugs that distort perceptions, and like it says, evokes sensory images in the absence of sensory input. So just add the psychedelic mind-manifesting drugs that distort your perceptions. Just make sure you add that to it as well. Marijuana is also considered as you can see at the very bottom, a natural hallucinogen. Experience hallucinations. People frequently feel separated from their body. So be familiar with hallucinogens. You can just kind of look over the levels of analysis. And that will end the show in the presentation. Lastly, I want you to be familiar with near-death experiences. You can find that in your textbook towards the end, discussing drugs. But just make sure you take a look at that. And that concludes.